Well, hello. Welcome to another, it's not a short devotional yet. This is a prelude to a short devotional. I've been having fun this week. While I was doing my devotional, a story was mentioned that I hadn't read perhaps ever, but I remember a little bit about the story of Rip Van Winkle. What do you know about him? You probably know that he slept a long time and grew a long beard. And that's honestly all I remembered. And what could this possibly have to do with a short devotional? Well, I want to talk to you about the sleeping Christian or the sleeping church, but you have to hear this story. You know, everything we do in life, whether we read a book or sit outside, can feed into our souls and our lives. And this story actually made an impact on me. So I'm going to read to you an abbreviated version of the story. I hope it blesses you. Well, you'll have to tell me later, at least that it made you laugh, okay? It is entitled Rip Van Winkle, written by Washington Irving in June of 1818. I love to read works that were written in the 1800s. The vocabulary, we have lost a lot. Not only do they not teach cursive anymore, so many of these words we've lost. So I'm hoping I can pronounce everything I'm reading, and I'll try to make this short for you, but I think you'll enjoy the story. Whosoever has made a voyage up the Hudson must remember the Catskill Mountains. They are a dismembered branch of the great Appalachian family and are seen away to the west of the river, swelling up to a noble height and lording it over the surrounding country. Every change of season, every change of weather, indeed, every hour of the day produces some change to the magical hues and shapes of these mountains, and they are regarded by all the good wives far and near. At the foot of these fair mountains, the voyager may have descried the light smoke curling up from a village. It's a little village of great antiquity, having been founded by some of the Dutch colonists in the early times of the Providence. In that same village, and in one of these very houses, which, to tell the precise truth, was sadly time-worn and weather-beaten, there lived a simple, good-natured fellow of the name of Rip Van Winkle. He was a descendant of the Van Winkles, who figured so gallantly in the chivalrous days of Peter Stuyvesant and accompanied him to the siege of Fort Christiana. He inherited, however, but little of the martial or warring character of his ancestors. I have observed that he was a simple, good-natured man. He was, moreover, a kind neighbor, an obedient, henpecked husband. Indeed, to the latter circumstance might be owing that meekness of spirit which gained him such universal popularity, for those men are most apt to be obedient or attentive to an excessive amount, servant-like manner, and conciliated abroad, who are under the discipline of shrews at home. Their tempers, doubtless, are rendered pliant and malleable in the fierce furnace of domestic tribulation, and a curtain lecture is worth all the sermons in the world for teaching the virtues of patience, long-suffering. A termagant or a harsh-tempered or overbearing wife may therefore, in some respects, be considered a tolerable blessing, and if so, Rip Van Winkle was thrice blessed. Certainly it is that he was a great favorite among all the good wives of the village, who, as usual with the amiable sex, took his part in all family squabbles, and never failed, whenever they talked those matters over in their evening gossiping, to lay all the blame on Dom Van Winkle. The children of the village, too, would shout with joy whenever he approached. He assisted at their sports, made their playthings, taught them to fly kites and shoot marbles, and told them long stories. Whenever he went dodging about the village, he was surrounded by a troop of them, hanging on his skirts, clambering on his back, and playing 1,000 tricks on him with impunity, and not a dog would bark at him throughout the neighborhood. The great error in Rip's composition was an insurmountable aversion to all kinds of profitable labor. It could not be from the want of or perseverance, for he would sit on a wet rock with a rod as long and heavy as a Tartar's lance and fish all day without a murmur, even though he should not be encouraged by a single nibble. He would carry a fowling piece on his shoulder for hours together, trudging through woods and swamps and uphill and down dale to shoot a few squirrels or wild pigeons. He would never refuse to assist a neighbor, even in the roughest toil, or was a foremost man at all country frolics, for husking Indian corn or building stone fences. The women of the village, too, used to employ him to run their errands and do such little odd jobs as their less obligating husbands would not do for them. In a word, Rip was ready to attend to anyone's business but his own. But as to doing family duty and keeping his farm in order, he found it impossible. In fact, he declared it was of no use to work on his farm. It was the most pestilent little piece of ground in the whole county. Everything about it went wrong and would go wrong in spite of him. His fences were continually falling to pieces. His cow would either go astray or get among the cabbages. Weeds were such to grow quicker in his field than anywhere else. The rain almost made a point of setting in just as he had some outdoor work to do. So that, through his matrimonial estate, had dwindled away. There was little more left than his cow, a few potatoes. It was the worst conditioned farm in the whole neighborhood. His children, too, were as ragged and wild as if they belonged to nobody. His son Rip, an urchin begotten in his own likeness, promised to inherit the habits with the old clothes of his father. He was generally seen trooping like a colt at his mother's heels, equipped in a pair of his father's cast-off galligskins, which he had most ado to hold up with one hand, as a fine lady would do with her train in bad weather. Rip Van Winkle, however, was one of those happy mortals of foolish, well-oiled dispositions who took the world easy. Eat white bread or brown, whichever can be got, rather than starve, or a penny than work for a pound. If left to himself, he would have whistled life away in perfect contentment. But his wife, continually dinning in his ear about his idleness, his carelessness, the ruin he was bringing on his whole family. Morning, noon, and night, her tongue was incessant going on about everything he said or did, was sure to produce a torrent of household eloquence. Rip had but one way of replying to all lectures of this kind, and that, by frequent use, had grown into a habit. He shrugged his shoulders, shook his head, cast up his eyes, but said nothing. This, however, always provoked a fresh volley from his wife, so that he was fain to draw off his forces and take to the outside of the house, the only side which, in truth, belongs to a henpecked husband. Rip's sole domestic adherent was his dog Wolf, who was as much henpecked as his master, for Dom Van Winkle regarded them as companions in idleness, and even looked upon Wolf with an evil eye as the cause of his master's going so often astray. True it is, in all points of spirit befitting an honorable dog, he was as courageous an animal as ever scourged the woods. But what courage can withstand the ever-during and all-abetting terrors of a woman's tongue? The moment Wolf entered the house, his crest fell. His tail drooped to the ground or curled between his legs. He snuck about with a gallowed air, casting many a sidelong glance at Dom Van Winkle, and at the least flourish of a broomstick or a ladle, he'd fly to the door with yelping precipitation. Times grew worse and worse with Rip Van Winkle. As years of matrimony rolled on, a tart temper never mellowed with age, and a sharp tongue in the only edged tool was the only edged tool that grew keener with constant use. Poor Rip! He was at last reduced almost to despair, and his only alternative was to escape from the labor of the farm and clamor of his wife. It was to take his gun in hand and stroll away into the woods. Here he would sometimes sit himself at the foot of a tree, sharing the contents of his wallet with his dog Wolf, with whom he sympathized as a fellow sufferer in persecution. "Poor Wolf," he would say, "thy mistress leads thee a dog's life of it. But never mind, my lad, whilst I live thou shalt never want a friend to stand by thee." Wolf would wag his tail, look wistfully in his master's face, and if dogs can feel pity, I verily believe he reciprocated the sentiment with all his heart. In a long ramble of this kind on a fine autumn day, Rip unconsciously scrambled to one of the highest parts of the Catskill Mountains. Well, there's more to this story, and I'll leave you there, just to say, in some magical fellow whose liquor he shared, he slept for 20 years, and later he found himself with a rusted gun and his dog gone, and a very long beard. Rip felt famished for want of his breakfast. He grieved to give up his dog and gun. He dreaded to meet his wife, but he didn't want to starve, so he went down the mountains. He shook his head, shouldered the rusty gun, and with a heart full of trouble and anxiety, he went homeward. Well, we come to find out that Rip slept through the Revolutionary War. It was with some difficulty he found his way to his house, which he approached with silent awe, expecting every moment to hear the shrill voice of Dom Van Winkle. He found the house had fallen around him in decay, the roof fallen in, the windows shattered, and the doors off the hinges. A half-starved dog that looked like Wolf was skulking around. Rip called by his name, but the poor dog snarled, showed his teeth, and walked by. This was an unkind cut indeed. "My very dog," sighed poor Rip, "has forgotten me." Rip finds his son, his daughter, and asks about their mother. "Where's your mother?" "Oh, she took and died a short time ago, and she broke a blood vessel in a fit of passion, yelling at a New England peddler." Well, there you have it. There's the story. Is there a moral or a purpose, other than to make us laugh? Well, you should know that time will slip away if you run from your troubles, but will you be happier if you do? Certainly not if your dog forgets you. And if you're a cantankerous big-mouth wife who's forever yelling at your husband, you just might break a blood vessel yelling at a store clerk. And most likely, you will not be remembered when you're gone. I have to admit, I can see some similarities to that wife and me in that story, and Michael does like to work outside a lot. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I did. I had fun reading it and telling it to you. And we are going to talk about sleeping Christians. Next Short Devotional. Until next time, I remain your friend, Lana D.